Let's start by taking a look at the day's headlines. US President Donald Trump says China wants to strike a trade deal after revealing he called his Chinese counterpart. We also have confirmation Presidents Trump and Xi Jinping will have an extended meeting at the upcoming G20 Summit. The top nuclear envoys of South Korea and the US are in Washington for talks on bringing North Korea back to the table for talks over its nuclear program. Plus, going for 2 terms, President Trump launches his 2020 re-election campaign by whipping up a massive crowd of his supporters in Orlando, Florida. So after weeks of will they or won't they, the most highly anticipated coming together of world leaders in quite some time will happen next week in Japan. Despite the blazing trade tensions, we now have confirmation US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping will have a lengthy face-to-face on the sidelines of the G20 Summit in Osaka. Aside from trade, North Korea's denuclearization is also expected to be on their agenda. Our Go Ryun-hee starts us off.
U.S. President Donald Trump has signaled a possible easing of trade tensions between Washington and Beijing. Trump tweeted Tuesday that he spoke over the phone with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping and said they'll have an extended meeting at next week's G20 Summit in Osaka. President Trump added their respective teams will begin lower-level talks prior to his face-to-face with President Xi in Japan. Speaking to reporters on the same day, White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow declined to provide details on the specifics of the preparations, but emphasized that Beijing must make structural changes for a trade deal.
Our position will continue to be we want structural changes here. We want structural changes on all the items, the theft of IP, the forced transfers of technology, cyber hacking, of course, trade barriers. We've got to have something that's enforceable.
China's state broadcaster CCTV also announced that President Xi is ready to meet Trump in Osaka to exchange views on China-U.S. relations. President Xi said he expects positive outcomes at the G20 summit. And in terms of trade, he stressed the two sides should solve their problems through dialogue on equal footing. This comes after the world's biggest economies have put tariffs on around $360 billion worth of each other's goods since last year. Their trade negotiations ended in May without a deal, and since then, Washington and Beijing have been blaming each other for the collapse of the talks. Presidents Trump and Xi are also expected to discuss issues related to the Korean Peninsula, such as North Korea's denuclearization, because the G20 meeting will fall a week after President Xi travels to Pyongyang. An analyst told the South China Morning Post that China may be using North Korea as leverage amid its trade conflict with the U.S. Go Ryun-hee, Arirang News.
Now, ahead of his 2-day visit to North Korea, Chinese President Xi Jinping wrote a contribution to the North's ruling party newspaper, the Nodong Shinmun, on Wednesday. He stressed that China will strengthen its communication and coordination with North Korea to work towards peace and security on the Korean Peninsula, saying China is happy to see a historic opportunity to resolve peninsula issues. The Chinese president emphasized Beijing is willing to draft together with North Korea some long-term plans for lasting peace in the region. He also expressed support for the North's new policy direction to develop the economy and improve the livelihoods of North Korean people. Now, Seoul's top nuclear envoy suggests Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to North Korea could accelerate the resumption of talks between Pyongyang and Washington. Speaking upon arriving in Washington for talks on Tuesday, Lee Do-hoon said President Xi's 2-day visit from Thursday could contribute to the denuclearization process and the establishment of peace. He also explained President Trump's visit to Seoul could also be a positive development. Local sources say U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, Stephen Biegun, will arrive in Seoul on June 25th or 26th. He'll stay until Trump ends his trip to South Korea following the G20 Summit in Osaka. And US President Donald Trump is formally launching his bid for re-election in the 2020 election with a huge rally in Orlando, Florida. He's no longer the dark horse candidate that few people thought would win in 2016, but there's little doubt the love him or hate him president has a few challenges to overcome. That said, Trump being Trump, he's sure to have some aces up his sleeve in the months to come. Oh Soo-young has this report.
He promised a break from traditional politics. And in his second run for America's top office, US President Donald Trump is once again pitching himself as the face of change.
So he still is the guy who is shaking up everything. And you can see that in almost every day when he does tweets and launches new policies and tariffs and tensions with Mexico and Iran and so on. He is still, to some extent, a disruptor.
Trump's strongest case for re-election is the robust US economy, with more Americans than ever before upbeat about employment and wages.
Trump made this appeal to working class people, and his actions with respect to Mexico and China, with respect to tariffs, I think it does appeal to a lot of people in those battleground states like Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin, as well as Pennsylvania. Another area that really appeals to the base as well is immigration, of course. And so he's taken a very strong stance on that issue, pressured Mexico.
But whether he's made America great again is debatable, despite strong support from his party and small dollar donors. Polls indicate the greater public are not convinced. Trump has the lowest approval rating in US presidential history, averaging 40%.
Markets are beginning to realize that you can't exactly bank on what the president says. And I think a lot of Americans are sort of sick and tired of the ongoing chaos that is the Trump presidency.
Domestic concerns such as climate change, the expansion of healthcare, and abortion rights are likely to be chinks in the armor for the incumbent president, who has largely disregarded these issues. His party's internal polling shows he lags behind former Vice President Joe Biden in key battleground states. However, some say a foreign policy victory of his own could swing voters in his favor.
He could pull off his own October surprise and have a Halloween agreement with Kim Jong-un. I think Kim knows that his best shot is for Trump to have a second term. And he would rather get the substance of a deal that can be built upon rather than roll the dice and just cross his fingers what might happen in 2020.
The insurgent candidate in 2016 and now running as the incumbent. He may now be the establishment, but it's clear President Trump has more shaking up to do in the months to come. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Now, acting US Defense Chief Patrick Shanahan has decided to withdraw his nomination as Secretary of Defense after serving as the Pentagon's acting chief since the turn of the year. President Trump has named Army Secretary Mark Esper as his replacement. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
Acting U.S. Secretary of Defense Patrick Shanahan has stepped down from officially serving as the head of the Pentagon. President Trump tweeted Tuesday that Shanahan has done a wonderful job, but had decided to spend more time with his family. Trump named Army Secretary Mark Esper as the new acting Secretary of Defense, explaining he'll do a great job.
Pat Shanahan, who is a wonderful person, is, as you know, going to take some time off for family matters, and I want to thank him for his service. But Mark Esper is going to be outstanding, and we look forward to working with him for a long period of time to come.
Esper has served as a U.S. Army Secretary since November 2017, responsible for recruitment, training, and care of soldiers on duty. He graduated from the U.S. Military Academy in 1986, the same year as Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. His experience extends to Capitol Hill, where he was responsible for national security issues as a staff member of the Senate Foreign Relations and Government Affairs Committees. According to CNN, Shanahan's decision to withdraw came shortly after the Washington Post published an article describing a violent incident in 2011 during which his son brutally attacked his mother, Shanahan's ex-wife, with a baseball bat. In a statement announcing his resignation, Shanahan explained it was unfortunate that a painful and personal family situation from years ago had resurfaced. He added he would welcome becoming the Secretary of Defense, but not at the expense of being a good father. The post has not been filled permanently since General James Mattis retired in January following policy differences with President Trump. Shanahan, a former Boeing executive, has been acting defense secretary since January. He was officially nominated to be the next Pentagon chief in May, but his formal nomination process in the Senate kept being delayed. Kim Yo-san, Arirang News.
Now, from next month, South Korea will impose a 10% value-added tax on international IT giants such as Google, Facebook and YouTube. This is in accordance with the revision to the VAT Act, which passed the National Assembly late last year. The revision calls for a 10% VAT on foreign companies' business-to-consumer digital services, which include online advertisements and cloud computing. The move is expected to increase the price competitiveness of domestic IT firms and to establish an estimate of how much foreign IT giants are making in South Korea through business-to-consumer transactions. Now, a powerful earthquake hit northwestern Japan on Tuesday night, triggering a small tsunami near the quake's epicenter. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Hong Yu. So, Yu, give us the details.
The quake, which struck at 10:22 p.m. local time, was recorded at a magnitude of 6.8, and it hit underwater some 50 kilometers southwest of the city of Sakata. Shortly after the quake hit, Japan's meteorological agency issued a tsunami warning, saying it expected a surge of seawater to arrive imminently in the coastal areas of Yamagata, Niigata, and Ishikawa. However, no major tsunami struck the coastline. 15 people were injured in the quake, thousands of households experienced power blackouts, and some train services were suspended.
A tsunami warning has been issued for Yamagata Prefecture to Ishikawa Prefecture. A small tsunami up to a few centimeters struck parts of Sakata, Yamagata Prefecture, and Awashima, Niigata Prefecture. We'd like to ask residents to move away from the coastal area and evacuate to a safe place.
Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga urged local residents to be prepared for possible aftershocks. More than 1,500 people have been evacuated to shelters in Murakami City and elsewhere in Niigata. Japan's Nuclear Regulation Authority says all 7 nuclear power plants in Niigata have halted operations and no abnormalities have been reported. Tuesday's quake was the strongest observed in Japan since a magnitude 7.0 quake rattled Hokkaido last September. Facebook is set to launch a global cryptocurrency called Libra by 2020. The world's biggest social network announced on Tuesday that Libra, a digital currency powered by blockchain, can be used in the Messenger and WhatsApp platforms to buy products online or wire transfer. An independent organization called the Libra Association will govern the currency. Facebook says Libra will benefit users thanks to very low fees and simple payment procedures. With more than 2.4 billion active Facebook users, watchers say Libra could gain a more mainstream audience than other cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoin. Hong Kong's Chief Executive Carrie Lam has apologized to the island's citizens again over a controversial extradition bill that sparked massive protests. However, despite saying sorry, she's still refusing to step down. Hong Kong residents says they'll keep hitting the streets until Lam is out the door. Lee Seung-jae reports.
Hong Kong's under-fire leader Carrie Lam on Tuesday announced the end to the controversial extradition bill, which she pushed and then postponed after it sparked one of the island's biggest protests since the former British colony returned to Chinese rule in 1997.
I have announced that we will suspend the legislative exercise, and immediately that afternoon, we put a stop to the legislative exercise by informing the Legislative Council that the bill will no longer proceed to second reading debate. I said and I undertook that if we do not have that level of confidence to address those anxieties and fears and differences in opinion, we will not proceed with the legislative exercise again.
Despite previously calling the protests a riot, Lam carefully reworded her remarks, this time saying the protests were peaceful. But despite her latest public apology, she refused to resign, saying she will instead continue to work for the people of Hong Kong.
As I have a 5-year term as chief executive, soon I am going to have my second anniversary of my office towards the end of this month. I still want to do a lot of work in the future.
Despite the public apology, student activist Joshua Wong, who on Monday was released from jail after serving a 2-month sentence for contempt related to his earlier protests, joined the mass protest immediately. He vowed to continue fighting, just like he did during the umbrella movement 5 years ago.
In the next 1 to 2 weeks, civil disobedience and also different kind of action might be the plan that happens soon. What we mean is, for this movement compared to the umbrella movement 5 years ago, is more leaderless, and also it become more organic, at the same time more decentralized.
The position of chief executive is not elected by the citizens of Hong Kong, but instead chosen by a 1,200-member committee. The umbrella movement of 2014 called for democratic reforms to this process, but they were eventually rejected. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In the UK, Boris Johnson remains the clear front-runner in the race to become the next leader of the Conservative Party and potentially the next British Prime Minister. On Tuesday, the former London mayor was the hot favorite among the party's 313 MPs in his second secret ballot, garnering 126 votes, 80 more than his nearest rival, Jeremy Hunt. Dominic Raab crashed out, receiving just 30 votes, meaning he failed to meet the 33-vote threshold required to advance to the next round.
Now it's time for our Life and Info segment where we focus on useful information for your daily life. Today we're going to talk about some indoor activities that you can try out this summer in South Korea. For more, I'm glad to say we have our Yoon Jong-min joining us in the studio. Jong-min, thanks for joining us. I'm not a huge fan of the heat and humidity in South Korea, so I'm glad you're here to tell us more about some cool indoor places we can enjoy during the hot summer months.
Well, good morning, Mark. Like you said, I will tell you about these nice places, where you can stay cool. Vacation season is nearing and many people are looking to head to the mountains or the beach. But of course, there are some people who want to have some fun indoors while staying in the city. Well, one place to shelter from heat is the movie theater. In downtown Seoul, you'll find some cozy theaters with large beds so that you can lie down and enjoy movies without getting bothered by anyone. You can even order a meal during the movie. There are also special theaters where you can watch movies as if you were in your own living room. This place has large couches, cozy lights, and a cool air conditioner. These special theaters are getting more and more popular, especially during the summer. Well, I asked some visitors what they thought of the theaters. Take a listen.
Outside, it's very hot, but inside here, it's pleasant. I can also enjoy hobbies indoors or take a rest, so I often come here. I also plan to visit more often in the summer to stay away from the heat.
It's getting hot these days, and it's stressful. I came here to enjoy a movie while staying cool.
For adults, the Beth Theater costs 45,000 Korean won or some $38 per person. For teenagers, it's 35,000 Korean won or some $30. If you order some food, of course, you have to pay more.
Yeah, quite expensive, but it's good to treat yourself sometimes. And I'm sure young couples looking for a romantic date probably head there most nights to enjoy a film at the same time, so that's very good information. Tell us more about some other places we can go to in the summer where we can enjoy something while soaking up the nice cool air conditioning.
Well, sure. Of course, movie theaters are not the only indoor places where you can enjoy your summer vacation. Well, I wonder if you have tried any virtual reality or VR content, Mark.
I have, yes.
Oh, you have? Well,
yeah.
That's really great to hear because I also checked out one VR theme park in downtown Seoul. There, people enjoy rafting, fishing, or surfing with VR games without having to go outside. Also, if you would like to feel some chills, a virtual reality horror zone might be a nice place to visit. Well, take a listen to what visitors and staff there told me.
Of course, you will feel it's more real out there, but inside here, it's convenient and easy to access these activities.
A lot of families, couples, and friends visit here ahead of the summer vacation to enjoy water sports in the center of the capital, like rafting or surfing through VR.
Well, like I say, Jungmin, I've taken my family to one or two of those VR centers. They're popping up all over around Seoul these days. I went to one in Ilsan, which is just north of the capital, which is rather nice. That one looked fantastic as well. But tell us more about some other things we can try while staying indoors out of the blistering sunshine during the summer.
Well, sure. Well, these days, lots of people will tend to spend their holiday at a hotel with their families or friends. And that's why some say hokangs, which stands for hotel and vacances or vacants. And you can also stay cool by heading underground. Gwangmyeong Cave in Gyeonggi-do province is kitted out with beautiful lights, botanical gardens, and a wine cellar. Well, it's the perfect place to avoid the heat and stay cool.
Well, yes, and very cheap option as well compared to the other ones.
That is true also.
Yeah, the entrance fee is just a very small amount of money, and it's
Compared,
probably cooler than even the movie theatre or the VR cafe. So good, lots of options that we can enjoy during the summer months. Jungmin, it was a pleasure for you to come into the studio. Hope to have you again soon. Thank you very much.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you, Mark.
Good morning. The showers have stopped in Seoul, but do expect on and off rain throughout the morning for those of us in the central parts of the country. Then many inland regions and eastern parts of the country could see another band of rain passing with 5 to 30 millimeters, which could be accompanied by lightning and strong winds. Meanwhile, those of you in Gyeongsang-Namdo province and its surrounding regions, as well as Gwangju, could see high levels of fine dust during the day, so please do bear that in mind. And when it's not rainy, we'll see sun peeking out from behind the clouds. And sunshine will boost temperatures to the warmer side. And those in southern provinces, including Daegu, could see highs topping 30 degrees Celsius again this afternoon. And for other areas, Gwangju will get up to 29 degrees, Daejeon topping out at 28 degrees this afternoon. Showers are in store again for Friday afternoon. And this Saturday marks the summer solstice already, and it's forecast to be a rainy one. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Wednesday morning here in Seoul. Stay tuned to Arirang TV. Our next newscast is coming up at noon Korea time. So until then, goodbye.